Okay, so it's officially 12:01, so I can actually say good afternoon, everyone, because it is afternoon. Welcome to another edition of the Cerini Connection. Today we'll be diving into a critically important topic, cyber wellness. I think I'm doing some cyber push-ups right now, kind of keep myself fit in the cyber world. In today's interconnected world, cybersecurity is no longer just an IT concern. It's something that impacts each one of us, both professionally and personally. Whether you're a nonprofit organization, a small business, or just an individual looking to protect your data, the strategies for maintaining cyber wellness are essential for everyone. So I'm actually totally thrilled to be joined today by Dr. Daniel Ford from Jovia, an expert in the cybersecurity area, who's going to share some valuable insight into how we can all better protect ourselves and our organization. So thank you, Daniel, for joining us.
Ken, thank you so much for having me on.
So let's start with kind of a simple question. So what are some of the simple but effective cybersecurity strategies that businesses, nonprofits, and people can implement?
So, I mean, there's quite a few. However, what I like to do is keep it simple. I'll give the martial arts analogy in that I just want to be able to do black belt level techniques that are all at the white belt level. So if I can just do the basics really, really well, then I'm going to wind up being able to keep my organization, my employees, and my members safe. So based on the size of your organization, the great thing to do is go to the CISA website. So that is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And they have these things that are called performance goals. And so based on the size of your organization, you can go there and they've got a lot of information that is going to be able to help you deal with your strategy based on your size organization. And in many instances, they have things based on your sector. So whether you're in financial services or manufacturing or other not-for-profit, they have things there lined up ready for you to go.
Do you mind going into the chat the email address? Oh, I'm sorry, website address for that
Yeah,
so that
absolutely.
people
I'll put that
actually
in there
have
right
it?
now. It's, CISA.gov.
Awesome. If, by the way, if people have questions as we're going through this, please just throw them into the chat. I am monitoring the chat so I can kind of work them in. So you say that on the CISA site, they have different strategies for different sized organizations and different sized businesses. So it's not a one size fits all. There's kind of different strategies that different organizations can use. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So, we all have a basic attack surface. And what I mean by that is things that are accessible to the internet, which means if our employees can access it, if our customers can access it, that means the criminals can access it. So if you're in manufacturing, your attack surface in this case is different than what it is from financial services outside of the common uh, background that we all might have, which is Microsoft, right? So we all might be using Office 365 or G Suite or something along those lines. So that's the basics. But then if you are in financial services, you have some different things that you have to take care of versus if you are in manufacturing or if you're a consulting company or you're in healthcare, because what is valuable to the criminal is going to be different based upon your sector that you're trying to essentially supply.
All right. So again, we're talking here about cyber wellness. So what does cyber wellness really mean? Can you maybe give a little better definition of what we're talking about when we talk about cyber wellness?
Yeah, so I break it down into two areas of this in order to have a wellness, which the first part is we have to have a common language. So I call this cyber literacy. And so I want to be able to, say certain terms that everyone's going to be able to understand, but that takes some education. So that might be like, the cyber criminal. Some people might say hacker, but then we get into these weird definitions of what's a hacker, what's not. But I don't have to get into all the super technical terms. It's just we're talking about some of the basic fundamentals. What's a password manager? It's literally what it says. It's something that's managing your passwords for you, because that is really the key to a lot of this. So you can't get compromised individually or as an organization very easily if the criminal doesn't have your password. So password managers are part of that. That's just in terms of a term. The next part is cyber hygiene. And think about that just like your own personal hygiene. What is your routine? and that route, for yourself to keep, to keep yourself fit, so to speak. In the morning, you wake up, maybe you brush your teeth right away, and you get in the shower. You're going through all those steps. Another way of looking at it is, and I'm not sure about all the audience, or I grew up in Maryland, so as part of the Maryland driver's test I had to take, it says you're supposed to go around your car every single time before you get in it and take a look at your tires, make sure everything looks good. Well, you should do the same kind of thing for yourself. And maybe it doesn't have to necessarily be on a daily basis, but it should be routine. So some of those things might be, have you checked your, Credit Karma scores recently? Has anything new been added to your credit report that you weren't aware of? Do you have your credit locked? Are you using a password manager? Did you sign up for any new sites? With your, have you signed up at a website called Have I Been Pwned, which I'll throw that in the chat as well, because that's going to let you know when you have been breached and what information was breached. So if your email address and password have been compromised, my opinion is you should never use that email address or password ever again, because both of those are two parts of a key. And most people use the same email address and the same password for multiple sites. That means the cyber criminal has access to multiple of your things. So that's what I mean from a hygiene perspective as an individual. Companies should be looking at things from that hygiene perspective, and they should be looking at risk assessments. Someone should be looking at the health of their organization when it comes to cybersecurity. And there's plenty of organizations that can help out there. Many of them, as if they're small, there's organizations like Arctic Wolf, Optiv, plenty of them that can assist small to medium business companies, even large companies, to kind of, hey, where am I at? And maybe on a quarterly basis, it's enough. So depending on your sector, you might have them doing it monthly, quarterly, maybe it's annually. As a financial institution, we're always under some type of audit, so it's happening pretty much monthly.
Okay. You mentioned, and I'm going to go back. I kind of bounce around a little bit here, so I apologize. You mentioned passwords, and that's one of the two key elements of your key to get in, right? Email address, password. When we're looking at passwords, how long should a password really be? I've heard some statistics that a password less than 13 characters long can be breached in a relatively short period of time, and 13 is kind of the length. Is that correct? Is there a amount?
So the longer the better. But what I recommend people is you really should be using what's called multi-factor authentication. So it's available if you're using Facebook, Instagram, your banks should be doing this. That's going to be the most secure, because that what that means is you can use something like Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator. They're free. You can download them from iTunes if you're an Apple person, and Google Play if you're on Android. They're free, and they're going to have a way to, basically what this means is I'm going to put in a password. It might be 8 characters, but what happens at that point is, and it's going to, through the push notification system to my phone, say, hey, do you authorize this communication? Yes. So now what we've done is we've just exponentially increased the complexity for that criminal to get access to your account, because they had to know your username, they had to know your password, and then they had to compromise your phone. So and that's what we're talking about in multi-factor. It's the factors of authentication are something that that's a password, something that you are, that's biometrics, so fingerprint, retinal scans, facial recognition, and then something that you have. In this case, it's your phone. So the more factors of authentication that you can implement, the more secure your particular account is going to be. So if you don't have multi-factor authentication, I strongly advise a password manager. And there's a lot of them that are out there. What you want to make sure of is it can work on your phone and it can work on your computer. So when we talk about the length of a password, I have this saying, it's not whether or not you're paranoid not. It's whether you're paranoid enough. I'm very paranoid because, well, I work in cybersecurity. So the password manager, pretty much all of my passwords are 30 characters plus. I don't even know what my passwords are except for the password to my password manager. And then I use a phrase. And my phrase, it's something that, I happen to know. It's probably pretty long. I don't know what it is, right, in terms of how many characters it is, but I can type it out pretty quickly. And that's the only password I have to maintain.
You're going to share that in the chat, right?
The password, no, but I will say password managers.
No, I was kidding.
But those are the things that people should really do. So that aspect of the multi-factor. So I use an 8-character password if I'm able to with multi-factor. That I don't remember what the math is behind it, but it's like the equivalent of well over 100 characters at that point.
Awesome. And then how often, or is it even required, but how often should you be changing your password, or is it not really necessary if you have the multi-facet authentication?
Yeah, so that's been one of the great things here recently. Finally, NIST, which is the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, has admitted that the only reason for you to change your password is if you believe it has been compromised. So that's where the have I been pwned is really beneficial to people. And I put that in the chat because if you know your password has been compromised somewhere, now change it. And if your email address was tied to it, I personally wouldn't use that email address again, but that's just me. I have lots of email addresses, specifically because I'm very paranoid.
So when we talk about cybersecurity, I'm assuming that that's something that should kind of start from the top, kind of create that tone from the top, and it filters down or permeates down. Is that where the cybersecurity starting point should come from, or should it come from somewhere else within the organization?
Well, culture should always be top down. Then I think what's the saying that the fish rots from the head down or something along those lines. But that's really culture is everything for an organization. It'll eat strategy, for breakfast. And so cybersecurity is just as much a part of the risk to an organization as every other type of risk. It's a business risk. So if the top does not consider cybersecurity as anything more than a cost center, I wouldn't want to do business with that organization, and I certainly wouldn't want to work there. So now the people who are most affected, and I tell all of our employees here at Jovia, they're the first and most important line of defense when it comes to cybersecurity because they're the ones that are being attacked. So we take an awful lot of pride in that our employees are identifying 400 to 500 unique phishing attacks per month. This is a tremendous amount, and that they're taking a healthy approach and knowing that cybersecurity is a part of their job too. And I really we thank them for it every month. We do an internal podcast for our employees talking about cybersecurity, and every month we thank them.
Yeah, I mean, we can go down a bunch of different ways. I'm kind of jotting down notes to myself.
Sure.
But in terms of, when we talk about cybersecurity, obviously you want that to align with your organization's, in the case of a nonprofit, mission. But you also have to kind of consider, as you said, the employees, the customers of the organization, the donors in the nonprofit world, and everything else, because all that information is sitting within the company. So, again, going back to the tone at the top, if you don't have the right tone at the top and you don't understand the significance of protecting the people that are stakeholders within your business, then you could kind of run into problems where you start losing some of those stakeholders.
Absolutely, you will.
So we do have a question. Somebody asked, in seeking bids from cyber firms for doing an annual vulnerability audit, what factors, requests should be included, and how do you know if it's a good value?
Well, that's really the crux of the situation. How do you know if it's a good value or not? And so I would, from an external standpoint, the first part I would always say to any organization, and I say this to my team routinely. As a matter of fact, I just did today in our team meeting, and that is there should be no surprises when an audit is being performed, we should already know everything that the auditors are going to find. Now, that's a very difficult thing to do because they're coming in, they've got fresh eyes, and they may have different tool sets that you don't. So the first part I would advise in this is that we want to make sure that it's not necessarily cookie cutter. Like we're trying to look at this as to how can we get better. So are they using a standard framework in order to assess my team? And now I not just my team, but my organization. And so we want to make sure they align. So if my organization is using the National Institutes of Standards and Technologies cybersecurity framework, version 2.0 at this point, although shortened to NIST CSF, I don't want to use an audit firm that's using an ISO 27001 standard or a COBIT standard, because then it's just, they're not going to align. So we want to make sure they're following the same framework that we're following, because that makes it to where, going back to that cyber literacy, we got to talk the same language. So if I'm using NIST, we want them to use NIST. Then the idea is, okay, what am I looking to try to get out of this assessment? Is it, I want to be better, or do I want to just validate that my team is where we believe we are? Or are we just checking a box? I look at it as, I want to make sure that my team is getting better tomorrow than they were yesterday. So when they're assessing it, I want them to assess as if, where I want to be in the top 10% of my peer group. So when you're assessing me, I want you to assess it and that I want to be in the top 10%. And I'm okay if that comes back and it says, it's satisfactory or satisfactory with recommendations, or even if it's not satisfactory, because I want to be in the top 10%. Now, maybe because you want to start off and like, I just want to be in the top 50% because it's your first time. Cybersecurity is a journey. It's not a destination. So pick that point and make sure they're working with you. That's how I get the value, is that they are working with me to be better. It should not be adversarial. So many times I go into an organization and I've taken over cybersecurity, and the audit departments or the external auditors, it's like a fight. It shouldn't be. We're working for a common goal to be better because we don't want the cyber criminals to win.
Right. I hear you. I've when we look at kind of creating filters and kind of limiting what sort of emails are making their way through, are there some filters that are better than other filters in terms of, because obviously the more emails that make it through with cyber threats attached to it, the more chances that an employee can click on it. So the goal up front would be to cut out as many of those emails coming in as humanly possible. Are there some software applications that are better than others in that process?
Well, I'm sure there are. It's a really loaded question there, Ken.
Right.
So, but I'm glad that you brought up email, because to me, the blended threat, which is what we're really talking about here, and that is something comes in through email, we click on a link, and it goes out through the web, through the internet. And so if I can stop those links from ever hitting my employees' inbox, then I win, right? Because they're bad. So there's multiple layers in this. We have these things that are called email gateways. Think of them as just another firewall, but it's a firewall for the email. They're okay. They're not the best anymore. The bad actors have found ways around those. So then, but you still need it, because it's going to take it, it's like a funnel. So it's going to stop some things, but not everything. Then we have to take a look at the next set of that. If you're using Microsoft Office 365, you want to make sure you have that enabled, the advanced threat protect. And that's going to get you some more benefit. And then we get into other pieces of email that's going to look at every single inbox. And that's where you start getting the real magic behind it, because not only do you have to worry about your employees not clicking on links, your IT and security teams, you want to minimize the amount of times they have to essentially investigate a potential phishing or incident. So there's companies out there like Abnormal Security that do that part of it. And that's where you're really getting, the bang for the buck, because they're stopping a lot of it that was already made it past the other two layers. Because we talk about in this thing in cybersecurity, it's defense in depth. And that means I need multiple things looking at the same problem, but possibly in a different way. So no one perfect solution. You need multiple. And there's other ones out there. Dark Trace does a really good job as well. So things like that are looking at inboxes as well as the inbound and outbound mail. So if you're doing that, you've significantly decreased your essentially threat landscape of being compromised, especially when it comes to ransomware, because almost all ransomware is a link being clicked.
So based on what you're saying, a lot of the incidents happen because somebody has let somebody in, right? So,
Absolutely.
right. So if that is the case, what are some of the habits that we can kind of instill within our employees so that they get better at identifying and ensuring that they're not doing some of this stuff that, kind of click a button and, oh my God, all hell has broken loose.
The first part is, we really want to make sure you have executive leadership support. It's got to come from the top down. We have to make sure that they know it's important. I'm very lucky in this case, in that our CEO, John Diazo, is one of our cyber champions. He is very invested in the cyber literacy and cyber hygiene that we are doing here at Jovia. So that's the most important part. The next part is, remember that the cyber criminals are really good at what they do. And I do not like the extreme punitive measures that many organizations take when they do their phishing tests, and they're like, all right, you fail 3, you're out. Like, we're just getting ready. Because that's not necessarily fair, especially if we haven't provided our employees with the right tools to be able to identify them. Are we talking to them? Are we figuring out what matters? What are they doing in order to, why do they click on it? Because they're good. It's a psychological game. These criminals it's no longer the misspellings like it used to be. It's no longer the calling you by the wrong name or the full name and things of that nature. They're very well crafted, and they make it look like it's a legitimate email. And they create a sense of urgency within that email, or a sense that I need help. Those are two emotions that us as humans are really vulnerable to. So they get you to click on it. And then when they do, that's when, that's when all hell can break loose at that point. But if you have things like multi-factor authentication, you have a good endpoint product like a CrowdStrike. And I know they've got a bad name right here at the moment because of an outage they caused, but it's still, to me, one of the top products of blocking ransomware and things of that nature. So they've done very well for us, here at Jovia, and I love the product. So then we've gamified it. We created a Cyber Champions program where, if you're doing some of these voluntary trainings and you're reporting phishing and you're being an active participant in cybersecurity, you can apply to be a champion. And that means, for us, it's really good because they get to come to some of our information security committee meetings. We make a big deal of it. Then we also created a game, and we called it the Cyber Bowl. And so every 2 weeks we were putting out games, and we had almost, I think, pretty close to like 100 people participating at any given time. But on average, it was about 40 to 50 employees that were being a part of this game. We created something for Halloween. It was like an escape room based on cybersecurity. So we really try to make it fun. We do the internal podcast, and we walk them through different threats. Like, oh, here's an email that came out, and we highlight these are the bad things that were in there. How do they hover over links properly? We take a lot of time to educate them because that's not their primary job. And we know how good the criminals are. So we really make it to where we're approachable. That's probably the biggest thing. We don't act as if we're better than anyone else. We try to be very humble in our approach. We're there, to help them be better. We want them to take these things home with them, tell their friends, tell their family, because if we can raise everyone's cyber hygiene up, we've just made it more difficult for the criminals to attack an entire community. So that's kind of our goal.
Yeah, so you kind of touched on a couple of really key points there, right? So it's education and making sure that there's regular, constant education, and that's super important. You talked about phishing tests. You want to maybe talk a couple seconds about what a phishing test is for those people who aren't using phishing tests?
So a phishing test is where the cybersecurity team or your IT team, we are creating phishing emails, and then we send it out to the employee base because we're trying to trick them. Sounds kind of bad, but I don't look at it as being we're trying to be punitive. We are trying to trick you because we're never going to be as good as the criminals. So if we can't fool you, we at least know that there's a better chance that you're going to identify the real criminal. And thus far, I can say that we have done so, because in the beginning, we were getting what felt like 50% of the company that would fail these tests of us trying to trick them, to now it's typically in the single digits. But what's more impressive is that we weren't getting anyone really identifying the real criminals, to now we're identifying 400 to 500 unique attacks per month. And then those attacks will never able to happen again because those domains get blocked. And so they have to go, the criminal has to use a different domain to come from. So that's the real victory there, is that our employees are really identifying the real stuff, which is tremendous.
Do you create your own phishing examples, or do you use an outside service for that phishing, or are there outside services that do that?
There are. We do both. So we have, through Arctic Wolf is one of them, and we also have our own internal capability to do so as well.
Cool.
And there's plenty of companies that are out there, like FishMe, KnowBe4. They're all over at this point. Any of them are. I wouldn't say any one is better than another at this point.
Got it. Does your strategy, your education, any of those things change when you're dealing with remote employees? Does your risk change when you're dealing with remote employees as opposed to dealing with in-house employees, since many of us now have a higher level of remote staff?
Not necessarily. It's all going to be based on your individual organization. So I'll give you an example. If your data center, all of your servers are sitting there in your corporate headquarters, and then you have remote employees, then yeah, your risks have changed, a good amount. Do other employees also have laptops? If the answer is yes, then it's possibly changed. But if your organization has a lot of SaaS-based applications, so SaaS is software as a service. That means it's a service that's being provided somewhere on a public cloud. Could be like Office 365 as a SaaS-based application. So if all of your applications are predominantly no longer in your brick and mortar data center, then your risks haven't changed very much, because everything is being accessed on the internet. But there's still things to take a look at, like, okay, they're connecting via laptop. Is the laptop encrypted? Because if they're moving around with their laptop and their laptop gets stolen and it has sensitive information on there, you want to make sure it's encrypted. Are you using a VPN? I would say today, the best strategy, like almost every breach that we read about right now, has happened either because it was a phishing, or there wasn't this technology called zero trust. Zero trust means I'm not trusting the device, I'm not trusting the user, I'm not trusting the applications that the user are going to, until we prove that they are trusted. And there's multiple layers. It's essentially just like, think about it being different locks on your front door. Sometimes to get into the front door, I've got 3 locks, but I might only have 1 lock on the master bedroom, so to speak, because if you're already in, then you might be a little bit more trusted. Maybe, but it's just, we want to make sure that the device you're coming from is authorized. The user that's using that device is authorized to use that device, as well as authorized to access, and then it's the user and the device trying to get to that application. So it's authenticating them consistently, all in the background, and the user doesn't really know. So this way, if the device is stolen, it doesn't just have access. If the user's credentials were stolen, it makes it more difficult to access. But it's those are really the two common things right now. If zero trust is implemented and you have multi-factor authentication, you've significantly improved your cyber hygiene for your organization.
How much of an issue is it in terms of utilizing a open access to the internet? So like if I go to like a guest at Starbucks, or I go to a hotel, or because a lot of people, they'll hop on their phone somewhere and they'll do something. I mean, how much exposure is that kind of creating?
A lot. I don't use public Wi-Fi ever. The reason is when you control the network, you control everything that goes on that network, and you can see everything that goes on in that network, even if you're using a VPN. And that's I find one of the common myths. Oh, well, I'm using a VPN, then I'm safe. Not necessarily, not if you don't control the network. Because, I mean, it's called a man in the middle attack. And we use the technology against itself. Now, there are some VPNs that are better than others, some that can detect this, but not all do. And some of them, like Proton VPN is one that I like, but there's plenty that are out there. But what happens is you think you're connected directly to this website. In reality, you're connected to some other network, and then that network is decrypting all the traffic and taking all the information you're getting, and then it's re-encrypting it. And they can do this even through a VPN, because the VPN, if it's utilizing SSL communication, which is we've always talked about, oh, is that little lock on the browser? Do you see that lock there? Well, that's not necessarily safe. It tells you it's encrypted, but it doesn't tell you you're encrypted all the way to that other server. So I advise people, and I still use a VPN, but I use my phone as a hotspot, and then I VPN through my hotspot, because I control the hotspot. So I know, at least in that case, I'm not susceptible to a man in the middle. I never use hotel Wi-Fi. I never use any public Wi-Fi like that. If I'm just going to go and do something silly like watch a movie, maybe, but not if I'm going to do anything sensitive.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the thing. Everybody now has their phone, and a lot of their phones are connected to their emails. They're connected to, and they're going in and looking at schedules, or opening up software within their systems and stuff, and they don't realize that the phone is kind of a port, just like anything else, that gets them in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue. So I know we talked a little bit about gamifying and all of that other stuff in terms of trying to boost not only the overall cybersecurity wellness, but also to kind of get people more interested in and involved in. Are these the same strategies you would use for maybe individuals who are not as well versed or not as savvy with technology, or are there other things that you would do there for individuals who are kind of more low tech?
We try to make solutions, or at least the way we teach people, as simple as we can, because we look at it as we want whether or not you are in a class that is just not very tech savvy, to all the way if you are tech savvy, but because we have to make it simple enough, because the vulnerable communities are vulnerable for a reason. And one of the big things right now is a lot of these cyber criminals are attacking the elderly, and they're really there's a movie out there that's very scary, because it does happen, and it was called Beekeeper, with Jason Statham in it, and it's literally about.
I saw it. Yep.
Yes,
Good movie.
it's
Very good movie.
yeah, and they're tricking them, and they're wiping out their accounts because they think that they've got a computer virus, and so they call the number that's on there, and it was really just scamware, and they called the number, they gave access, and then they lose everything. And it's really not, since you gave them access, none of those funds are really recoverable. If your financial institution can't get it back, it's on you. So it's really scary in that aspect. So we try to make things, in as we're developing our blogs, as we're developing podcasts that we're putting out to the public, making things very simple, with easy directions for them to understand, because it's really, remember, it go back to the basics. If you can do those white belt techniques at a black belt level, then you are 90% safer than the rest of the world, and that's kind of the goal. Let them, unfortunately, go to somewhere else that you identified it and were able to push it off, and that's what we try to do.
I think a lot of times also you find that businesses feel like, oh, I got cybersecurity insurance, I'm good, I'm protected, I'm covered. But I mean, that's not what that's for. And a lot of times it doesn't even cover what you think it's covering.
This is correct, and I know there's a question about cyber insurance. At what point do you recommend separate? Like, if you're in business, I think you need to have it. Like, if do we want to go without car insurance or health insurance? Like, cyber insurance is important. Now, to what level you might need it, that's based on what risk tolerance level you have, because you can't eliminate all risk, and so it's the risks that you believe you haven't been able to eliminate, you want to insure. So in the event that a bad action occurs, you're somewhat protected. But even then, the insurance companies are going to look at, were you negligent? If you were negligent in your security practices, they may not pay out, because it's about, did you do everything you could? And that's debatable. But did you do the basics right? Did you patch your firewall? Did you patch your systems? Do you have endpoint protection out there? Are you doing some of these basics? Can you prove that you were doing everything you said you can? Because we have to fill out a very long questionnaire for our cyber insurance. And if we answer that we're doing something and it comes to find out that we're not, that's a problem. So you might not get, in the event that you had to use it, might not get it out there. But the reasons there, and the insurance companies, if you get a good one, they also are providing services for you to help you not get breached. So they'll come in and do certain assessments for you, because they don't want you to get breached. They don't want to have to pay out. So you take a look at that, and then in some cases, because the other reason to have insurance, so let's say you're an organization, you're still bringing revenue. Jovia is a not-for-profit as well, but we still have to bring in revenue because we're getting it back to our members. I'm more worried about the third party that's out there, and if they get breached, I have no control over that, and that might cause a lost revenue stream for a period of time. My cyber insurance will cover me for that lost revenue, because that third party was breached. It was no fault to Jovia. That company ABC that we use for loan origination, I could no longer use it. So I lost, because maybe they were down for 14 days. And that means I lost, $3 million in revenue. At least I have some recourse. Because I'm not going to be able to sue that company because of all the software agreements, but my insurance will cover those things.
So if we kind of think about things from a nonprofit perspective, nonprofits have staff, but they also have volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So from a volunteer perspective, how should nonprofit organizations be thinking of cyber wellness with respect to their volunteers? What should they be doing from an education perspective and everything else?
So I provide our volunteers, which is our board. I'm not sure if in all nonprofits the volunteers are the board members or not. But we present to them, cybersecurity training. They've actually, in some cases, asked for more. We try to get them high level training, because part of their job is, as the volunteers in our case, because they're either on our supervisory committee or direct board committee, they're signing up to essentially hold us accountable to the security practices. So they can't really do that if they don't have some of that common language again, like the cyber literacy part. So we provide them that kind of training. At the same time, though, we don't give them the same level of training as we do all of our employees and management staff, because there are volunteers, but we do provide them the ability to have more training, just on a volunteer basis. So we put in our reports, hey, here's some things that we suggest you read or you look at or watch this video, because it could be helpful, because it's going to help them in their own personal lives or what other organization they may work for.
We're running a little low on time, so we have time for like another couple of questions, but maybe really quick, can you talk maybe a little bit about some of the common cybersecurity mistakes you've seen, or maybe some war stories or stuff that kind of can put things in perspective for our listeners today?
Absolutely. So the first thing I'll touch on is the personal side. One of the things that is like a pet peeve of mine is when people say, well, I have nothing to hide, or I have nothing that anyone would want. It's not true. We all have something to hide. If you think that you don't, then I would suggest removing all of the curtains in your home. All right, we all have something that we don't want others to see, or that should be private. So there's that. We all have something, and the other part to that is what we forget here in the United States. $200 may not sound like a lot of money, but in other parts of the world, $200 will feed a family of 4 for a month. So even if you have $50, $25, that criminal just needs a little bit, and they can just keep coming in and doing it. So you have something. The other part of that is you forget who you're connected to. So a lot of these will go under impersonation attacks. So I'm going to, take your social media profile. I'm going to create another one because I found different things in a breach, and I'm going to impersonate you, and I'm going to go after your friends. I'm going to go after your family. I'm going to go after, anyone that you're possibly connected.
Clients, your customers. Yeah.
Right. All of that. So you do have something. So that's one of the things. You do have something to hide. That's a common mistake people make. Or I have something that I don't have anything that anyone wants. You definitely do. The value is in the other side. So whoever is receiving it, that's where the value is. It's not how you perceive yourself. It's how the criminal perceives you. And they definitely perceive you as having value. You're worth something to someone. So they have that part. Companies kind of do a very similar thing in that they will not make cybersecurity as part of their overall business risk. They look at it as a cost center, and they don't invest enough into it. They assume, since I haven't been breached, that I'm not likely to get breached. And so they will get somewhat lazy on those tactics. And they forget that it's not a matter of if you're going to be breached, it's when. The annual rate of occurrence for a small to medium business is to get breached once every 5 years. So where are you at in that cycle? Just because you haven't doesn't mean you won't. So are you patching?
And it just takes one.
Right. And some of these things are very, most of the ones that I've read about were preventable breaches. So Move It, which was a very big one in the summer of 2023, it was preventable. If you configured your firewall properly, nothing would have happened. If the vendor had done code scanning so there's this thing called OWASP. OWASP is, they put out a top 10 web vulnerabilities every year. And in there, one of them is called a cross-site scripting vulnerability. Well, if they were implementing that at that particular software company, they would have found was vulnerable. They didn't do it. And so that was lazy on their part. So there was a lot of mistakes that were all easily handled, and they just didn't do it. And it goes beyond that. Auditors, because they always ask for the firewall audit logs, and then they look at the firewall rules. That means they weren't doing it. So there was a lot of people that failed with that breach, and they just all kind of said, oh, well, no big deal. I've got cyber insurance. I'm not sure that every one of them got paid out. I could be wrong. I don't know. I wasn't privy to all of that information. I just know that we weren't susceptible to that particular vulnerability because our firewall team's pretty good. So, but we take it seriously here.
I totally appreciate the time you spent today. We're out of time. Thank you. This was incredible. I think just by the number of questions that came through the chat, we didn't kind of get to them all, but we'll try to get back to people. And Daniel, maybe you can kind of help with some of that. That would be awesome. I think I understand a lot more than I did when I came into this, so I really appreciate it. So
Absolutely. And
before,
if you send over the questions, I'll gladly help in answering them.
awesome. Before we wrap up, I'd like to remind everybody that on December 4th at 8:30 in the morning, we have our board training webinar for anybody who's on a board of directors or any nonprofits who want to have some of their boards get some training. We're going to be talking about some of the changing dynamics of the nonprofit board, recruiting new board members with a DEIA focus, board responsibilities and governance, and things like that. So make sure you register at CeriniCPA.com to reserve your spot. Because of the board training, we're not going to be doing a Cerini Connection in December, but we'll be back again in January. So we'll see you in January for the next Cerini Connection. Have a happy Thanksgiving, have a happy holiday season, and again, we'll see you. Stay safe and secure online. Thanks, everyone.